Today, 2 interviews. First with Dr. Chris Reinhardt as we talk about the importance of a mineral program, not only for the vitality of your cows and their offspring, but how that plays out in the maturity of those young heifers that may one day be in your herd.
How old she is at the moment, the day you turn the bulls in the first time, is the number one predictor of how long she will stay fertile in your herd.
Then a sit down with 2 ranchers, Niels Hansen from Wyoming and Cerri of Nevada, as we discuss several topics like foot and mouth disease and are we starting to see our industry step back and come together on some important issues.
We're in an environment right now that's bringing people together.
But what about those issues that have created division? Nothing is off the table as we discuss the beef checkoff and animal traceability.
As ranchers, we tend to be an independent group. We don't like people telling us, we don't like the government telling us this is what we have to do.
We've got a lot to cover, so stick around on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And this is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. We are glad to have you joining us on our program today. Look forward to sharing with you a great program here today. As you heard there in the opening, we do have a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to take too much time here on our opening. Do want to remind you that coming up in the latter part of our program, of course, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and meteorologist Don Day will be stopping in as we take a look at that long-term weather. Now to introduce our first guest, as you heard there in the opening, Dr. Chris Reinhardt, who is a beef cattle technical services nutritionist with Zenpro. And Dr. Reinhardt, glad to have you joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you, Justin. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Well, Dr. Reinhardt, I know you have a lot of years working and being in the cattle business yourself, and know that for a lot of us, when we get into this time, we start to really analyze the nutritional needs and the health of our cattle. Not that other times aren't important, but we know for these cows that are carrying calves, for some folks, you're in that 3rd trimester area. For others, maybe you're a little ways out before we get to that. But nevertheless, it is a time where we really need to be analyzing the health of our herd.
You couldn't be more right, Justin. A lot of her nutrition, we're going to have to deliver by hand in a lot of parts of the country this time of year. And also, in the last couple of years, we've uncovered, I'll call them kind of some tip of the iceberg type sleeping problems in our cow herd, particularly from a standpoint of undernutrition of various nutrients. And so it's really important that you get with your nutrition professional, your veterinarian, this time of year. The timing is perfect. Get on top of all of her nutrient needs, whether that be energy, protein, but also the trace mineral aspect and vitamins as well.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back in a bit. I'm going to come back to what you just said about some of the sleeping problems because, and we may be able to answer that in the next question here, but a lot of times, I think in years past, there's been a mindset that when we look at a nutrition, at a mineral program, that it's only applicable for certain times of the year. And we've definitely seen a little bit more research and a lot more study out there showing that it's just not a certain quarter of the year that you look at a mineral program. It is something that has some validity for a year-round type program. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for the producer who really want to optimize their genetics that they've invested in, and we all understand that the cost of good genetics have done nothing but increase recent times, but also the value of one more calf. What's the value of one more calf at weaning time? Unprecedented high markets right now. And so to leave anything on the table right now is really hurting our opportunity for profitability. But then back to the genetic side, to set up the cow herd for short-term and long-term success, we've got to start, I guess I always go back to the analogy of big rocks, little rocks, and sand, right? Mm-hmm. And as we're trying to really optimize fertility of the cow, fertility of the heifer, and fertility of the bulls, we've got to really go through our nutrition program with a fine-tooth comb. And for the producer who wants to get the most out of their cow herd and retain those high-value, best genetic females, Zenpro Avela 4 is really an option they need to look at with their nutrition professional and their veterinarian.
Mm-hmm. As you talk about that, we've addressed the fact this time of the year where a lot of the feed is coming maybe manually fed. For some folks, maybe for other folks, it's still they're out grazing, but it's on a poor nutrition type of, maybe it's just standing grass or whatever that may be. Nevertheless, we are looking at down the road. At some point, these cows are going to be calving. For some folks, they're in third trimester. For other folks, it's a ways out, and really need to be looking at that. You talked a little bit about, good healthy calf, and it's going to start basically, we've got to get that cow on a good nutritional plane to where she's got something to pass on to that calf.
That's exactly right. We've got to be thinking of that calf this time of year, like you said, whether they're early or late spring calvers, while that calf is still inside his mother is the optimum time to start thinking about the ultimate health of that calf for two reasons. Number one is the cow is very good at passing nutrition to the calf while it's still gestating. But then number two, we've got to set that cow up, and especially the heifer portion of our herd, to make the best possible and the most possible colostrum and the best quality colostrum that we possibly can, because we all know once that calf hits the ground, colostrum is the primary source of immunity for that calf for a number of weeks and months after it is born. And so the only way to do that is by taking optimum care of the cow and the heifer right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that's interesting, and I'm going to kind of jump a little bit away from nutrition, but I think we can come back to that a little bit with this as you answer this, is that our cattle industry right now, we're seeing the smallest herd that we've seen in years, and the growth in that herd rebuilding is extremely slow. And it's really a time where there's going to be a lot of focus on our females in addition to our bulls out there. But if there's ever a time to be really looking at, and you addressed it a bit ago, longevity in our cows, getting one more calf, boy, this is the time.
Yeah, it's actually an exciting time. I have been doing this a long time, several decades, and it's an exciting time for the rancher for a change. Not that we still don't experience some bumps and ups and downs, as you well know, Justin,
Yeah.
But it's really an exciting time to think of this upcoming calf crop. But I like the word you use, longevity. So number one, the value of one more calf has never been higher. So we've got to really go through with a fine-tooth comb. But the thing I like to remind people is the number one predictor of longevity of our females is the day she was born. How old she is at the moment, the day you turn the bulls in the first time, is the number one predictor of how long she will stay fertile in your herd. We dramatically reduce the risk of her falling out of the herd due to infertility or coming up open simply by giving her another 21 days on earth. Mm-hmm. And so number one, let's have one more calf this spring. But then number two, let's have all of our calves as early as possible in the calving season so that we can retain those high value genetics for 10 years and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Boy, that's interesting there. As you were talking about that, the thing that come to my mind was just the fact that really from the standpoint when we look at a mineral program, and we talk about in our genetics, we want good foundation genetics in our genetic herd, but at the same time, foundationally, it as you said, it starts when that calf is born and getting that replacement heifer a good solid start. And it's, when I look at this and I hear you talking, to me, it sounds like we're just really putting a good foundation under these animals from day one.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with cow herds all across the country, but in the Mountain West in particular, we've got tremendous weather challenges from this point forward into and through calving season. And if anything, Justin, we've got to be even more watchful this time of year for things such as body condition score. That cow, and especially that heifer, and especially that coming second calf heifer, can slip on a dime. She can be good 1 month, and if we have some significant weather events and we haven't really taken care of nutrition and boosted the nutrition available, she can slide backwards in a very short amount of time. And so body condition score is number one. But again, I'll reiterate, the entire nutrition program needs to be optimized right now. Something we haven't touched on, we talk about these excellent genetics we've got available. Well, the dirty little secret of those awesome genetics is they're different than your granddad raised 30 and 50 years ago. And so the needs of that cow and even that heifer are much greater than they would have been 30 to 50 years ago. And so the cow is different, the heifer is different, and we've got to provide a higher level of nutrition than we might have done just a few short decades ago.
Yeah. Dr. Reinhardt, you had mentioned a bit ago about some sleeping problems that have been identified that Mineral can now start to handle those situations, and maybe you've already addressed some of those. What were you meaning when you said some of the sleeping problems that we've identified in the last several years in our beef industry?
First and foremost, I think we've come a long way in the last 30 years or so in being really vigilant on the trace mineral aspect, copper, zinc, and manganese primarily. And those are the first place where Avela 4 can come in and really revolutionize the nutrition program for the cow herd. But then the other one I want all the producers and their veterinarians to be aware of is vitamin stability in the free choice mineral program. And there's a number of producers who are very progressive and forward-thinking producers who are feeding a free choice mineral and have been for years. But one thing we've learned is vitamin A and secondly, vitamin E, but primarily vitamin A is only stable in that product for a limited amount of time, and get with your nutrition professional to confirm what that is. But I guess the gross example is if the mineral pallet has been sitting in the abandoned freight train trailer on the back 40 for the last 18 months, the vitamin A in that product is virtually zero, even though the label still reads what it did 2 years ago. Vitamin A is not stable long term. And so we've had a number of herds have difficulties, health challenges, primarily in baby calves, newborn baby calves, that turn out to be vitamin A deficient, even though they might have been feeding what they thought was an adequate level of vitamin A.
You know, that's not something I guess I was fully aware of or had put it all together, but it makes sense that there would be a shelf life or a life where the efficacy of that product is in its most prime, but it makes a lot of sense. Dr. Reinhardt, you referenced a couple of times the product Avela 4, and I think it's important that we let folks know just kind of how they would be able to get their hands on that, or if they want to look and see what products carries the Avela 4 in their mineral package. So how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, again, I try to emphasize that for the producer that really wants to get the most out of their herd, they really need to talk to their nutritionist, their feed provider, or their veterinarian about getting Avela 4 into their mineral program and into their feed program. It's the best way to optimize nutrition. It's the single best way to make sure we, number one, get another calf and make sure we keep those heifers, prepare those heifers, and keep those heifers in the herd for a long period of time.
You bet. And I think with that too, you know, we could talk profitability in all of this. And I think if folks really dial in and listen through our conversation here today, you're going to be able to draw the parallels between where you see profitability in this in terms of good, healthy calf, getting longevity in your cattle herd. There's profitability. I think that's one of the biggest losses of revenue in our whole entire industry is longevity. And I think you can draw that correlation together. Dr. Reinhardt, before we go real quick, is there a website that they can go to? I know Avela 4 is a product from Zinpro. Maybe a little bit about the company and about where they can get more information on the product.
Yeah, it's been exciting. Not to go into too much detail, but Zinpro is an animal health and performance company, and we provide that through Optimum Nutrition. The first place to go just to learn a little bit more would be zinpro.com, just like it sounds. Learn more about Avela 4. We've got a veritable mountain, Justin, of research on cow-calf production and the benefit that Avela 4 can provide. But zinpro.com is probably the first place to go, but any of your local feed representatives would have abundant knowledge about Avela-4 and how we can help them help your herd.
All right. Well, Dr. Reinhardt, I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
No, thank you, Justin. This is a tremendous program. Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. And again, Dr. Chris Reinhardt joining us here today on the program. Some very valuable information. I know there's some things I didn't know that he shared with us here today about this, so I come away with learning a little bit more, and I hope you did too as well. By the way, if you want to find out more about the product, we talked about Avela-4 from Zinpro. You can go to their website at zinpro.com. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we'll continue on with the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Nothing delivers a better return on investment like cattle health. Set up the next generation for lifetime performance with Zinpro Avela-4. Achieve reproductive success in your herd with a 20% increased conception rate and a 16-day tighter calving interval. Calves from cows supplemented with Zinpro have stronger immunity and 28 more pounds at weaning. Help protect your profits by partnering with Zinpro.
And welcome back. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. As we change gears just a little bit, head now into our main interview here today. And really, this is coming on the heels as I'm sitting down at the table with a couple gentlemen that I'll introduce here in just a moment, as we are just going to sit down and have basically a roundtable type discussion on some of the topics that were talked about here at the Wyoming Stock Growers Association's convention. And as you're listening to this, and I know you're more than likely, you're probably from another state than Wyoming, you're thinking, well, are they going to talk about anything that is relevant to what we do here in our state? And I'm just going to say, yeah, we will, because many of the topics that we talked about here at the Wyoming Stock Growers Association's convention are extremely relevant to anybody in the ranching industry. And I think that was really, from my standpoint, is just to sit down with a couple gentlemen that do ranch, one from Wyoming, one from Nevada, coincidentally, and we're just going to kind of have a roundtable discussion on some of those topics. So first of all, to introduce my guest joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show, Niels Hansen. He's a third-generation rancher from Rawlins, Wyoming. If you're not familiar with where Rawlins is at, it's located on Interstate 80. It's kind of south-central Wyoming. They have a cow-calf yearling operation, and that area is kind of considered the high desert area of Wyoming. Pretty flat, a lot of big, tall sagebrush. We had the opportunity to visit their operation many years ago when they were the Wyoming Stock Growers Association Stewardship Award winners, and see what they've done on their operation in many areas, including sagebrush mitigation. And also, he's a past president of the Public Lands Council. So Niels Hansen, one of our guests here today. Also joining us, Ron Cerri. Now, they ranch in northern Nevada there in Humboldt County, and a couple different units, one in Humboldt County, one in Elko County, Nevada. They are cow-calf, fourth-generation family ranch. Coincidentally, he's also a county commissioner, and he is also the secretary of the Public Lands Council. So we got a couple folks joining us here today that not only ranch, but also are on leadership for the Public Lands Council. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But first of all, gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, guys, like I told you last night when we lined this up to sit down and visit about just some of the topics that were talked about here at our convention, and in a lot of ways, not to be disrespectful to our livestock industry groups, but basically to set those folks just aside and us three as ranchers have an open discussion, dialogue about some of the topics that were talked about. They're no doubt they're not exclusive to Wyoming, because they're ranching issues. And if you run cattle anywhere in the country, these issues that we're going to talk about here today are extremely relevant to you all. I want to start right off the bat. Joe Goggins out of Billings, Montana, was coming back from a sale out of Nebraska and was able to stop in and visit with all of us during a reception. And just to cut to the chase on the whole deal, guys, he was just getting to the fact that as he was representing the Livestock Marketing Association that had recently done several different focus groups all across the country, and trying to get down to the core of the things that we as an industry, as ranchers in general, can agree on. And taking some of those topics that are controversial, and not to ignore those, but let's just set them aside. And he was really emphatic that we need to spend some time focusing on the topics that we do agree on. And one of those that he brought up, that we brought up here several times on our show and extremely passionate about as well, was we've got to be thinking about how do we keep these family ranches in the families and not going out of business. Ron, it's an important topic.
It really is. The atmosphere out there, the ability to be part of a ranching operation is not what it was 30 years ago. The cost of everything, land, livestock, equipment, it's pretty hard for someone who comes from the outside that doesn't have that family help to get started in that. And then again, there's a lot of issues out there. I think a lot of our kids on the ranches have seen how difficult it is to try to make a living, to stay in business, to fight. It seems like fight all the time with whether it's the federal agencies or whoever. And it's much easier in the city to get a good paying job and go home every night and get the weekends off and all that stuff. So yeah, just to get kids to they have to love it. They have to want to do this as a career to stay involved.
Niels, I want to go to you next and go back to essentially the basis of what Joe was talking about the other night, and that was really getting, as an industry, coming together on issues that we do all agree on. And I guess as I was listening to that, and I have heard echoing sentiments from others in the industry as well, do you think we're getting at a point here within our industry and some of these groups that they're trying or seeing what they can do to be maybe a little bit more receptive, or folks just in general a little bit more receptive to setting aside some of these things and knowing that we do need to come together on some of these topics?
I don't want to, I'm not critical of anybody or anybody's position on anything, but unfortunate, or maybe I should say fortunately, we're in an environment right now that's bringing people together. Because, as working our way through all our different local associations here, I've seen if your ox is getting gored, you come to the meeting and participate. But if everything's going pretty good at home, you look at it and say, well, I really don't have time to go up there and spend 2 or 3 days. I need to stay here and take care of business, whatever the case may be. But now everybody's under the gun, so it's really bringing people together. And when we're we have that heightened sense of insecurity or fear, it's a lot easier to find common ground. And at least my experience, once we find that and then we move forward, we never lose it.
It seems like we've kind of run a course here in the industry where we've fought over issues long enough where people are just getting tired. And it's not just in agriculture. Okay. For years, people were applauded for drawing a line in the sand, and we're not going to change, and we're not going to come together and be diplomatic on issues. And we're finding that's getting nothing done.
Right. Yeah, that's correct. We're such a small group anymore. The number of ranchers out there continues to decline. We can't afford to be fighting. I would love to see more people who think they have the answers, and maybe they do have the answers, get more involved. It's easy to sit at the coffee shop or at the bar and complain about what's going on. We need more people to actually get involved. If you don't like what's happening, then, step up and try to make that change, within, instead of just griping about it at the coffee shop.
Yeah.
If I may, Ron's exactly right. That a lot of people, they have this perception that if they're going to come to the Wyoming Stock Growers and participate, they're going to go home with a job and they're going to have to invest a lot of time, and that's not the case. But we need to hear everybody's opinion so we can find that middle ground.
Yeah.
If they don't come and talk to us, we deal with what the information we have on the table. That's all we can do.
Yeah. In fact, one of the quotes that I'd heard somebody say said, "The world belongs to those that show up." And I feel sometimes we kind of get stuck on the ranch, and it's pretty easy to then just get out of the communication. Real quick, we're going to hit one more topic as we're moving through our convention here. And he talked about this. We don't have a lot of time in this segment to talk about it, but estate tax, that was a big thing that Joe talked about the other night as well. And that's something that's really, I know for years was a big issue, and then it kind of went away because we had some solutions there. But there's some elements with the estate tax we need to be aware of as well.
Yeah, we're on a time clock right now with the protection that we've got in place. I believe it's 2 years and it goes away. So that people need to, really get something put together and take some action. We've been on our family ranch. We've been working on it for quite a while. We've got plans in place and everything, but we're going back and checking it all and redoing it all right now. And our plan's only 5 years old.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break here. My guest today, Niels Hansen. He's a third-generation rancher out of Rawlins, Wyoming. A very cool and interesting family story about Niels, and the fact that you're as close to an immigrant family as I know.
Yeah.
You know, with your family ranch coming out of Denmark. Yeah, out of Denmark.
Third-generation ranch, and my sister and I are first-generation born American.
There you go. So that's an interesting story. Also joining us, Ron Cerri out of Nevada, fourth-generation family ranch, cow-calf unit, a couple of units that they run down in Nevada. We're going to continue on with them when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
There are lots of nutrition tubs out there, but none can match the true blue commitment of Vitalix. Our tubs offer you the most concentrated nutrition at the lowest cost per day. That means more profit for your operation and improved performance for your cow herd. In fact, research shows Vitalix tubs increase feed efficiency by 20% while boosting conception rates, herd health, and weaning weights. Learn more at Vitalix.com. Vitalix, the true blue tub.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, as I'm joined here at the table with a couple other fellow ranchers, as we are just basically rehashing and discussing some of the topics and the issues that were brought up at the recently held Wyoming Stock Growers Association's convention. Not really issues that are tied only to Wyoming. They're really pertaining to anybody in the beef and the ranching cattle industry. Niels Hansen, who's a third-generation rancher out of Rawlins, Wyoming, that's in southern Wyoming, is a cow-calf yearling operation, and also Ron Cerri, who ranches up in northern Nevada. They're a fourth-generation family ranch, a cow-calf operation running on a couple units there in Humboldt County and in Elko County, Nevada as well. Guys, as we move to one of the other speakers that was on hand, of course, was Colin Woodall, who's the CEO for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and there were a lot of different things he touched on there, but to outline some of the key things, of course, right off the bat, there's concern not only by their organization, but by many of the industry organizations on getting a farm bill passed. We know, as they've said, that if something does not happen in the first quarter of next year, that the ability or the chances of it happening in 2024 start to go down dramatically due to the fact that it is going to be an election year. So that was definitely a high priority. But in addition to that, there are other things. One of the things right off the bat, I think for a lot of us that have some concern, is foot and mouth disease. Now, when we talk about foot and mouth disease, there's a lot of different side topics that go along with that. One of the things that he outlined specifically was getting that vaccine bank built up, understanding and knowing that if foot and mouth disease ever hits the country, it's going to be extremely detrimental to our U.S. cattle herd, or the North American cattle herd for that matter. And there's some elements of that all coming into play, which leads to the other discussion that happens that has some consternation with our own industry, which is traceability. And Niels, regardless of where we're at or where you believe on some of the side issues within the issue of foot and mouth disease and traceability, it is something that we really need to be coming up with a conscious plan on.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's huge. And by just sheer luck, there was a group that did a study right down Interstate 80, where a large part of our operation is, and they calculated how quickly foot and mouth could spread down the interstate system. If we had one instance, something got thrown across the fence and into our livestock. It is mind-boggling. It's terrifying to see how fast it spread through and just wipe us and all our neighbors out.
Yeah. Well, and with that, I want to be balanced a bit in this, but there is some realness to this, and I just want to have that discussion real quick, Ron. And from a standpoint of just let's lay the affiliations to the side, and let's as ranchers have that discussion amongst ourselves about traceability and the issue of foot and mouth disease.
Well, on traceability, you know, as ranchers, we tend to be an independent group. We don't like people telling us, we don't like the government telling us this is what we have to do. On a personal side of this, I've been individually IDing using electronic ear tags now for better than 20 years on our operation, because, you know, it's a marketing tool for me. We've got to understand this is what the public wants. They want to make sure that their food is safe. They want to know where it comes from, and we can either fight that or we can join. I still have problems with, you know, with the government mandating it, but I think that the public acceptance for this is what the public wants. The marketplace is going to drive this. I think that you're going to receive more for the calves you can sell, or the cows, because they are individually traceable. A lot of my beef goes to Walmart. If you want to sell cattle to Walmart, you have to individually ID. If I don't want to, well, then I take Walmart out of that equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you hit a good point there, and that was something that Colin mentioned, that they were in favor of traceability, not mandatory, but voluntary, and looking at it as some element of an insurance plan. And what made me in my head think about this was, we've got a lot of companies here in the trade show area, and anybody that goes to any of the national shows are going to see they're selling livestock risk protection programs, and that's kind of a big push right now, and there's really a lot of value in those things to us as ranchers, and we're willing to do that. But then we're balking a little bit at animal traceability and putting these tags in our cattle. And you're right, Niels, when you said how fast that could move down an interstate or down a highway. And we have to step back, I think, and look at this from, if something were to go, we were to get that, boy, we need to have some protection, and this, the traceability has that. And I'm not trying to toot the horn on that entirely, because I also like the idea of voluntary versus mandatory. But Niels, your thoughts on traceability? Well,
I agree with Ron. We've been using electronic tags on our cattle also. We haven't done so much on the marketing like he's doing. We've retained ownership and fed the cattle out and pursued it that way. Whether you've got the cattle tagged or not, an awful lot of our industry doesn't understand just how much the quality and the depth of the records that the packers and the feeders have on these. When our cattle come up for sale, they automatically know what they're going to grade, how the size is going to be, what's percent of prime, or at least close. So it's really, there's a lot of information out there already without even tagging them. And, we need to recognize that. It's a new world. On the marketing side, he was talking about it's a big thing in the other countries that they pick up a package of meat out of the rack and they go over to a scanner and lay their package on there, and they pop up a picture of where the animal was raised, the family that was raising it. They want that tie back to the land. They want to know that there's a family operation back there that's taking care of things and doing it right.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about this, some of these topics sort of meld together in fringes and on different things, but it kind of leads us down a little bit of a road. Of part of the concern with FMD is imports. And of course, that conversation comes up. I know every ag entity in the country right now, there's definitely some common ground in the fact of not wanting to see beef coming in from Paraguay that we're hearing about now. That's a big concern. But the other thing, when we start talking about imports, and this came up, I don't remember what conversation or who was presenting, but we were talking about imports, and I don't know if it was you asked or somebody asked about the fact of, why do we even have imports? That's a topic that I think needs to have a little bit more. People need to think through that, and we need to have that conversation.
Well, I did ask that question of Colin, because I have friends in the audience that they have been staying home, taking care of business, raising their families, haven't become stock growers. They didn't realize how badly our industry, or the meat industry, needs those lean animals from the other countries, because our cattle are such high quality and they're so fat that they can't get a low percentage grind for hamburger. Mm-hmm. Without having those outside cattle.
Yeah. Ron, your thoughts?
Well, we aren't in an isolated world anymore. If we want to be isolist here, a big part of why our prices are what they are is because of exports. You can't expect that we're only going to export and not import. It has to be a trade-off. If we were to shut our markets down as far as imports, there would be reciprocation there, and wouldn't make prices any better here. Mm-hmm. That's my feeling.
Yeah, and I think too that just the fact, Niels, that you mentioned too is, they're just the grind. Just physically the grind that we're needing to fill that. Otherwise, if they had to give us, if we had to try to fill that ourselves, first of all, we're at our lowest beef herd numbers that we've had in years. So we physically just don't have it. So we're going to take another break here. My guest today, joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show, Niels Hansen and Ron Cerri, as we're just kind of recapping and having a rancher discussion about some of the topics that were talked about at a recent stock growers meeting. We're going to come back and talk a little bit about some public lands things, because as these guys both on the Public Lands Council, that's near and dear to their heart, especially out of these western states. There's some big topics there, and we'll also hit on a couple other issues when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest, as we're just sitting down here, sort of a roundtable type discussion with a couple other fellow ranchers, Niels Hansen out of Rawlins, Wyoming, which is southern Wyoming, and Ron Cerri out of northern Nevada. And guys, we earlier mentioned Joe Goggins was one of the speakers here at the conference, and one of the things as they were working on behalf of the LMA Association to dial in and dial down on some topics that were important to their organization, things like really us as an industry having to come together on issues, things like in the Endangered Species Act, the estate tax, borrowing ability, just some of the things that he mentioned. But one of the things he said is that we threw some of the controversial topics off the table, things like the beef checkoff, country of origin labeling, and traceability. So he's not here. So we're going to jump back into this topic of the beef checkoff. And I know that there's been in the industry, elements of that has created some frustration. At the same time, it's also went before litigation and come out and still functioning out there. As we move ahead, there is, as they talked about, there's the OFF Act, and that stands for Opportunities for Fairness in Farming, and introduced by Senator Cory Booker. Also, Senator Mike Lee out of Utah, who's a Western senator, is part of that too. Ron, tell me your thoughts a little bit.
You're asking me what my thoughts are on the beef checkoff? Is that right? Okay. Well, checkoff's probably been going on now probably 40 years or so. And from its very beginning, it's been controversial. It's always been my feeling that every industry has to promote its product, and that the checkoff deal is something that we need to continue. It's been $1 for 40 years as well. Is that enough? Sometimes I ask myself, everything else has gone up. Why hasn't the checkoff gone up? And I think we have to be prepared. I know a lot of the controversy is in how it's administered and who administers that. I mean, that's good debate. I mean, I think that keeps us honest, keeps everyone honest. Colin told us that they're not the only contractor out there that manages the checkoff program. There's something like 16, I believe he says, contractors out there. A lot of times the side that says that, NCBA is profiting off of this really doesn't understand the program and how it's administered. So it'll continue to be debated, and there'll be people that don't like it. Yeah.
Niels, I want to go to you about this OFF Act that's being introduced, because really it's doing nothing as far as eliminating the checkoff, but it's about the part of it is trying to bring what they feel is more transparency to it. And the issue a little bit was there's already that transparency there to some extent, but there's a couple ag groups that are for this, and probably several of them that aren't. But so we've got two people within the industry, that some in favor of this and some against it.
Yeah, it's a subject that have got more tentacles than an octopus.
Yeah, for sure.
It reaches out in various ways all over. Senator Booker, he's a diehard vegan. He really wants to do a lot to help the meat industry. Yeah. But he claims he's trying to help the small farmer and rancher. I've been in D.C. testifying when he was questioning us about that kind of stuff. But he's grabbing a topic that's emotional, and then he's capitalizing on it. Now, why Senator Lee's involved, I haven't been privy to any conversation to get what his thinking is on that. But this is a huge topic, and people a lot of times forget, and the people that are opposed to it don't remind anybody. Industry voted this in. We did it, chose to do it years and years ago, and it's been tested, like you said before, so it's still there. But like so many, the act itself is like so many things that are running through the political system. They say it's going to do A, but actually the effect is B, and they got nothing to do with each other.
Yeah. Well, and I worked in media years ago, and one of the things that was required with some dollars collected through the beef checkoff was to go back and just let ranchers know what the money is being spent for. And I've seen ads come up, whether it's in Facebook or different things like this, and it frustrates ranchers. Well, why are you advertising to us? Because we already have the product. But I think sort of missing the point. I mean, there was mandates that were put forth of how that money is to be used, whether it's to campaign the product to folks that are consumers, as well as education to the ranchers, and that's kind of been mandated in there. And I feel like sometimes there's almost a no-win situation for these guys that are running the checkoff.
And I've heard just the opposite also. You know, we hear it all.
Yeah.
If you when you're out and going around and going to meetings like the three of us have been to, I've been there and said, well, I never see an ad. Where's that money going?
Yeah.
Well, no, they're not running ads in Rawlins, Wyoming. They're running in New York City, where it'll do some good.
Yeah.
You know, and we just forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
We get caught up in the emotion and don't look at the big picture.
Boy, just that topic, you could get caught up in the emotion and not looking at the fact or the issue as a whole. I think we could throw that saying on about anything we've discussed here today. All right, you guys are both very heavily involved in the Public Lands Council, and so I want to spend the rest of our interview talking just a little bit about that. We don't have a lot of time, but we both all three of us just walked out of a meeting where we were listening to a legislator out of southwestern Wyoming on concerns over the Rock Springs RMP, and I know for folks listening, we had a lot of folks listen that are in states that don't have public lands and probably don't understand this situation. But as we were talking before we went on air, it's important that even though you're in a state that doesn't have public lands, probably listen, kind of tune in what's going on, because this stuff is coming from Washington, D.C.
Yes.
This is coming from Washington, D.C. Yeah, you're out of Nevada, a gob of public land out of Nevada. We're in Wyoming. There's a gob, especially in your part of the country, there's a gob of land checkerboarded all through there of public lands. So as we come away from that, just your quick thoughts, and I'll go to each of you on this, about these issues right now and on how we're going to handle these public lands, this one specifically on BLM.
Yeah, there's so much of what the government does in the so-called managing federal lands that crosses the border, and it has a huge effect on private property. That map that we were just looking at for the transportation plan pointed out, right up the center of that, where there's going to be no access. There's not going to be any vehicles out there. If you can drive out, but you can only be there for an hour and you have to leave again. There's a strip through there 40 miles wide that every other section is private property. Well, the property owners, and we're one of them, we're just blocked off. We won't be able to operate anymore. So it's a direct attack on private property rights. And that's where PLC gets into issues from time to time, because I tell everybody, yes, we're the Public Lands Council, but in actuality, we're the Lands Council, because we get brought in and have to defend it all, private and federal.
Yeah. Ron, what about you? I mean, boy, Nevada's got a gob of public land as well, and you've had your own issues beyond just the Rock Springs deal, but I know every state that's got public lands is watching what's going to go on in southwestern Wyoming, because it's going to affect the whole western part of half the country.
Yeah, Nevada is 87% federally owned. So as ranchers there, our operations are tied to our federal lands. There wouldn't be a viable ranching operation in Nevada if they couldn't use our federal lands. I think people, whether you're in a federal land state or not, need to watch what's happening out there. I mean, it has a lot to do with endangered species, water. Those are all issues that will affect you whether you're on federal lands or on private lands. What comes down in the West in regards to the federal government telling us what roads we can use, how we can use the water that we believe, the states manage the water, and we have to make sure that the federal government recognizes that, and that those waters are actually personal property of ours, even if it's on federal land. our state laws in Nevada is a use it or lose it state. If you don't use that water, you lose it. Mm-hmm. And if you lose it, you're losing value in your ranches. So just because it's federal land doesn't mean that you shouldn't be concerned about it.
Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate you joining us here. We kind of scratched the surface really on a lot of things that was talked about here. I mean, there were some big topics, but I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and just kind of have a discussion about it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. And again, my guest today, joining us here today, as we just rehash a little bit about some of the topics we talked about at the recently held Wyoming Stock Growers Association Convention. Niels Hansen out of South Central Wyoming, Rawlins, Wyoming, more specifically, and Ron Cerri out of Northern Nevada. Appreciate them taking the time to sit down with me here this morning and just kind of visit about some of these topics that are relevant to any of us in the cattle industry across the country. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to hear from the Captain Tim O'Byrne on this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and meteorologist Don Day will be checking in as we take a look at our long-term weather. Stick with us. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Before we hear from the Captain Tim O'Byrne, it is making me think about the fact that I know he's been real busy here as of late, getting things ready for the next issue of the Working Ranch magazine coming out. He and all of the team busy getting things pulled together for that, and I can just rest assured right now that you will be expecting and have in your hot little hands and in your mailbox coming up at the first of the year, the next new issue of Working Ranch magazine. And like I've said, we are in the time of the year where I remind you this is a great opportunity to buy somebody a subscription as a Christmas gift. It's pretty simple to do. You can go to workingranchmag.com and you can simply do it there. Well, let's now check in with the Captain, Tim O'Byrne, for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Justin, last week's episode 145 was excellent. Well, all your episodes are really excellent. But this one with respected industry consultant Neville Spear was, there's a lot of information packed into that interview. Folks, I encourage you to go back and check it out on any podcast platform. And it was so good, actually, we condensed it, and we're going to run it in the Jan-Feb issue to kind of show folks what we're talking about here. One of the interesting points that you brought up is you asked Neville what he thought about the plant-based protein ventures and what's going on with that. And his answer was, it's a dead business. And I can tell you folks, and you know that I've been watching, I watched the meat case here. We're living in a very large urban center, Southern Nevada. Christine and I went to the Kroger's here the other day, and they are doing a big refit of this mega box store that we go to. And I've been watching and reporting on the diminishing of the meat alternative section of the meat case over the last 4 years has gone from 58 inches all the way down to nothing. And so they're refitting this store. I went in and looked with a fine-tooth comb to see if there was any plant-based protein section in the new meat case, and there is none in that particular Kroger store. So that is good information to know. And back to you in the booth, Justin.
All right, thanks, Captain. And I was kind of chuckling a little bit, recalling something that happened this past week during the Wyoming Stock Growers Association's convention. One of the speakers had asked everybody in the crowd if they had tried a plant-based burger or piece of meat. And, of course, he said, even if you did, you probably wouldn't. This wasn't the crowd you were going to raise your hand in. Nevertheless, I don't think really in that crowd there had been any takers on that. And I think that's the story worldwide, not just with ranchers, as we well know, but just the general consumer. when it comes to plant-based beef products. Well, let's switch gears now and check in with meteorologist Don Day, who's standing by with a look at our long-term weather. And Don, you and I were joking before we went on air how as we look ahead into this coming week and the next couple of weeks here in the month of December, what this weather is going to look like. It's just kind of this, just let's wait and see how this is going to play out. We do know there's a lot of cold building up, clear up in the North Pole, I guess, if we're talking Christmas terms this time of the year. And at some point, it's going to have to break free. And in the meantime, we're just kind of sitting here waiting.
Yeah, I tell you, there's a lot going on in the Northern Hemisphere. You mentioned the cold. Over the past week, we've had temperatures between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit below zero in parts of Siberia. And there's been a large cold air outbreak in the last couple of weeks across a lot of Europe. And that now has shifted a little bit more east into Russia, parts of Northern Asia. And it's a lot of cold air, but it's on the other side of the globe. So that's one reason why, relatively speaking, it really has been fairly mild for this time of year across a lot of the 48 states. Then we're also looking at El Nino still going on out in the Pacific. That's adding warmer, more mild air into the lower 48 states at times. But also, it's kind of like gas and matches because we've got matches up with that cold air in the northern latitudes on the other side of the globe. And we've got this El Nino, which is kind of like gas. And so we're a little concerned because when you put those two together, that could cause a wide variety of weather. So we're watching those two phenomenon and seeing how they interact. And how they interact is something that I think our weather modeling tools are kind of having difficulty with. Trying to nail down a forecast past 3 or 4 days right now is very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, and as we look at what it's already done, it's really pushed a lot of moisture west of the Continental Divide. Now, this last week, we did see a little bit, some storm come on the west or on the east side of the divide and in through the northern plains just a little bit. But for the most part, the west half of the country has really seen a lot of weather, more specifically the Northwest.
Yeah. And the Pacific Northwest is one area that in an El Nino winter does tend to be drier than normal, but they have seen a lot of weather in Washington, Oregon, portions of Idaho, far northern California, but central and southern California, a lot of Nevada, Utah, Arizona, hasn't seen much of really anything. Northern Plains as well hasn't seen anything real significant, although we have seen some winter weather here recently over the last few days going to those areas. One part of the U.S. that's been wet and will continue to be wet is part of the Southern Plains in the southeastern United States. And we are keeping an eye on a potential storm situation that may bring rain and snow to parts of New Mexico, Texas, maybe southern Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma. So we're seeing activity that you associate with El Nino, which is a wet pattern in the south and southeast. That's developing. But the wet weather that you usually get in central and southern California and parts of the southwestern United States hasn't kicked into gear yet. But this is a different El Nino. It's not going by the usual El Nino rules, and I don't think they will. So this is kind of one of these situations where, hey, here, hold my beer. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, Don, appreciate you checking in with us on a look at our long-term weather.
Sounds good.
And again, you can catch meteorologist Don Day each and every morning on his daily video podcast at dayweather.com. By the way, while you're at his website, maybe check out some of the things he has for sale. If you have somebody in your life that's kind of a weather enthusiast, well, there's some things on the website that might make some good Christmas presents. Check it out at dayweather.com. Stay with us. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'll tell you what's in store for next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Coming up next week, you're not going to want to miss this. It's beef on dairy. That will be our topic as Dr. Ty Lawrence with West Texas A&M University will be our guest. I've got a lot of questions. I'm sure you do too. Be sure to tune in on next week's show. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. My email address is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.